I thought I was stepping into the happiest day of my life, but in truth, I was walking straight into an ambush. The house smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon pies, and warm bread. Candles glowed in the corners, painting the dining room in soft amber light, the kind of glow that makes even the sharpest edges of life seem softer. I remember pausing at the doorway for a moment, letting the laughter and clinking glasses wash over me. My heart swelled because for the first time in years, it felt like maybe, just maybe, my family and I had finally found our way back to each other. Thanksgiving had always been a complicated holiday for us. Too many old wounds, too many unspoken rivalries, too much history stuffed between casseroles and cranberry sauce. Yet that night, as I stepped into the room, I wanted to believe things were different. My cousins were smiling, my sister was sipping wine without rolling her eyes at me, and my mother's hands didn't tremble the way they usually did when tension was thick. For the first time, I allowed myself to relax. I pulled out a chair near the center of the table, smoothing my dress as I sat down, trying to match the atmosphere of peace. The silverware gleamed, the napkins were folded like little crowns, and laughter rippled around me in soft waves. My uncle raised his glass in a toast, his cheeks red with wine and good cheer. "To family," he said, and for a brief moment I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. I wanted to belong to that word, family. I wanted to let go of the gnawing memories of arguments about money, inheritance, and land. I wanted to believe that we were whole again. For a while, it worked. Stories were shared, jokes were told, and the rhythm of conversation carried me into something resembling joy. I laughed. I leaned in. I sipped from my glass. My chest filled with warmth I had not felt in years. But then, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple beneath the surface. I caught the way my sister's eyes flickered toward me and then darted away quickly, almost too quickly, as though she had been caught. I noticed my cousin whispering into my aunt's ear, both of them stifling a smile that didn't feel warm at all. My uncle's laugh stretched too long, like it was covering something, and the more I looked around, the more I realized how many eyes weren't something. My cousin's hand resting too tightly on her husband's wrist, stopping him from speaking at certain moments. The silence that fell too quickly after laughter, as though conversations had been clipped shut just in time to keep me out of them. My stomach tightened. I pushed food around my plate, unable to taste the flavors anymore. The warmth I had felt minutes before now twisted into unease. I smiled too brightly, laughed too loudly, tried to drown the growing suspicion with noise, but it only made me feel more like an outsider. And then, as if to confirm the unease crawling through me, I caught my aunt's eyes. She looked at me the way someone looks at a stray dog that has wandered into the wrong yard. Not cruel, but pitying. And I hated it. It was then that I remembered the history we had all tried to bury. The fights after my grandmother's death, the bitter words exchanged over her estate. The subtle ways my sister had always managed to get what she wanted, even if it meant stepping on me. I remembered the endless nights of overhearing arguments about land deeds, wills, and who deserved what. Those memories rose now like ghosts, making it impossible to ignore the tension in the room. Still, I told myself, tonight is different. Tonight is Thanksgiving. Tonight is about family, forgiveness, and new beginnings. I forced the thought down like a bitter pill and clutched my glass tightly, raising it as my cousin called for another toast. "To secrets kept and secrets shared," he said with a sly grin. Laughter followed, but my heart sank. What did he mean? Why did it sound like it was meant for me? I tried to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. I felt the stares again. The way their eyes seemed to linger just a little too long. It was suffocating, like being under a microscope. And then everything changed. The door opened, not a gentle push, not the shuffle of a late guest. It was firm, decisive, the kind of entrance that demanded attention. Conversations halted mid-sentence, laughter froze on lips, and every head turned in unison. A sheriff stood there. The air shifted instantly, the warmth evaporating like smoke. His presence was an intrusion, but no one dared to speak. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp. his boots leaving faint traces. It wasn't a long look, but it was enough to send a shiver straight down my spine. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't about the family, it was about me. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, each stride pulling the silence tighter around us. My hands trembled under the table, hidden beneath the napkin I clenched like a lifeline. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the entire house was holding its breath. And then he removed his hat. The room seemed to shrink, the walls leaning closer, the air pressing down on my chest. My pulse thundered in my ears as his eyes swept the table, pausing once more on me. The words had not yet left his mouth, but in that moment I knew with a bone-deep certainty. And as he removed his hat, silence fell. The secret he carried was about to destroy everything. It wasn't the champagne that made me dizzy. It was the whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. The sheriff's entrance lingered in the air like smoke after a firework, thick, confusing, impossible to ignore. His hat still rested against his chest, his eyes roaming the room, and though no words had been spoken yet, I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass, more for stability than celebration. Everyone else seemed to recover quickly. Forks clinked against plates again, laughter resumed in cautious bursts, and my uncle even tried to start a new toast as if nothing had happened. But I wasn't fooled. A shadow had passed through the room, and it left a crack in the performance my family was desperate to keep polished. It started with a whisper. I didn't mean to hear it. The table was long, the room alive with noise, but somehow the words slipped through, sharp and deliberate. My sister leaned close to my aunt, her lips barely moving, her voice low but cutting. She still doesn't know. I froze. The words clung to me like burrs, impossible to shake off. She still doesn't know. Who was she? Was it me? My skin prickled under my dress, heat flushing up my neck. I tried to convince myself I'd misheard, that maybe she was talking about a recipe or an whisper. Maybe I wasn't supposed to hear because it wasn't about me at all. But then another fragment reached me, carried over clattering forks and bursts of laughter. She'll break when she hears it. This time, I couldn't deny it. My chest constricted and I felt my pulse quicken. My eyes darted from face to face, searching for someone who might look at me with reassurance. Instead, all I found were half-hidden smirks, eyes darting away too quickly, forced laughter that died as soon as I joined in. Paranoia or betrayal? I didn't know which was worse. I set my glass down, steadying my hands under the table where no one could see them tremble. My thoughts tangled into knots. What didn't I know? What could possibly be so terrible that they'd rather whisper about it than face me? And why did it feel like the sheriff's presence was tied to it all? Every detail around me sharpened under the weight of my suspicion. The way my mother's eyes avoided mine when I tried to catch her gaze. The way my uncle's toast didn't mention me at all, though I was supposed to be at the center of this celebration. The way my sister's nails tapped against her glass in a rhythm that felt like a countdown. The warmth of belonging I had felt earlier shriveled into suspicion. I was surrounded by people I had known my whole life, but suddenly they felt like strangers conspiring in a language I didn't understand. I tried to focus on the food, on the flicker of candlelight, on the laughter that still rippled around the table, but none of it mattered anymore. The voices were louder now, even when they were low, not in volume, but in intent. Every whisper felt deliberate, every glance rehearsed, every silence deafening. And then came the worst thought of all. What if it wasn't paranoia? What if this dinner, this entire evening, was never about celebration? What if it was about me and what I didn't know? The sheriff shifted in his seat at the edge of the room. He hadn't spoken, hadn't moved much since his entrance, but his presence was an anchor dragging me deeper into unease. Why was he here if nothing was wrong? Why did he look like a man carrying a burden too heavy to set down? I watched as my cousin leaned forward, his voice a low rumble, his hand covering. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed my chair back just slightly, the legs scraping against the floor loud enough to draw glances. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, and for the briefest second, silence fell. But instead of answers, I received more smirks, more polite smiles, more masks that I could see right through. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, my body buzzing with a fear I couldn't yet name. It was then, in that thick silence, that a voice cut through the whispers. It wasn't soft or hidden. It wasn't meant for just one person's ear. It rose above the clinking glasses, the laughter, the murmurs, carrying across the room with clarity that felt like a blade. The question landed in the center of the table like a hammer striking glass, sharp enough to shatter everything I thought I knew. And then, one voice rose above the whispers, loud enough for everyone to hear, the question that shattered me. When the envelope appeared, it wasn't a gift. It was a loaded weapon aimed at me. The question still rang in my ears, hanging over the table like smoke. It had shattered the fragile illusion of celebration, leaving nothing but silence and darting eyes. My chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, my skin prickling with dread. And then, before I could even process the weight of that moment, the sheriff shifted in his chair. Slowly, with the kind of deliberate movement that makes time stretch, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The room tensed, as if every person at the table had drawn the same breath. My aunt set down her fork with a clink that sounded louder than it should have. My cousin's smirk faltered for the first time all evening. Even my sister straightened, her glass hovering mid-air. And then I saw it. A cream-colored envelope, thick, sealed with a blot of crimson wax pressed into the shape of a crest I knew all too well. My grandmother's. My stomach dropped, my throat tightening so quickly I could barely swallow. The envelope looked harmless, ordinary even, but in that moment it felt as dangerous as a loaded gun pointed straight at my chest. I knew, deep down, that nothing good could come from it. The sheriff held it in one steady hand, his knuckles pale under the strain of his grip. He didn't look. Grandmother. The word alone sent a jolt through me. She had been gone for years, but her shadow lingered in every corner of this house. Her death had torn this family into factions, each of us clutching at scraps of memory, inheritance, and blame. I thought I had put it behind me, thought I had survived the storms her absence unleashed. But now, staring at that envelope, I realized she had never really left. Gasps fluttered through the room, soft but sharp. My uncle leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with greed. My sister bit her lip, her fingers tightening around her glass. My cousin's smirk returned, sharper this time, like a blade waiting to strike. And me? I felt like the floor had given way beneath my chair. This, the sheriff continued, his voice carrying weight, is a sealed testament. A second will. The words cracked the room open like lightning. Conversations erupted all at once, overlapping, sharp, frantic. A second will? She can't do that. I knew it. It changes everything. My chest constricted as I struggled to breathe. I had heard rumors after my grandmother's death, whispers that the official will wasn't the only one she had written. But I had convinced myself they were just stories fueled by bitterness. A second will meant everything we thought we knew about her estate, about who inherited what, could unravel in an instant. My mother's face turned ashen. My uncle looked like a man about to leap across the table. My sister's expression flickered between triumph and fear, as though she already knew what was inside, but wasn't ready for the rest of us to see it. And me? I realized, with chilling clarity, that I was the only one who hadn't known this was coming. They had been waiting for this moment, whispering about it all night. I was the fool, sitting blind at a table where everyone else had been playing a secret game. The sheriff placed the envelope carefully on the table, right in front of me. The weight of it thudded against the wood like a gavel striking in a courtroom. Her instructions, he said slowly, were that it be opened tonight. In the presence of family, I wanted to scream that I wasn't ready, that I didn't want to know. But the room leaned in, eyes hungry, breaths held. Glasses forgotten, breaths suspended. Every pair of eyes fixed on me, waiting. Some were hungry, some nervous, some gleeful, but they all wanted the same thing. I picked up the blade. My fingers brushed the cool wax, tracing the crest that had once been a symbol of family pride, but now felt like a curse. My chest tightened as the blade pressed into the seal. The wax cracked with a sound that felt deafening in the silence. My stomach twisted, my palms slick with sweat. I slid the paper free, the texture rough under my fingertips. And then I saw the first line of words. Not blessings, not memories, not even instructions. Accusations. Accusations that cut through me like a knife, each word sharper than the last, each sentence dragging me deeper into the darkness my grandmother had left behind. But when the seal cracked open, the words weren't blessings, they were accusations. The moment I saw her handwriting, it felt like my grandmother had risen from the grave to speak directly to me. The crack of the wax seal still echoed in my ears, but nothing could have prepared me for what lay inside. The paper was yellowed with age, its edges brittle, but the ink was unmistakable. I would have known that handwriting anywhere. Her script was elegant, strong, the loops of her letters just as they had been on every birthday card she had written me, every note she had tucked into my lunchbox as a child. For a moment, my chest tightened with something dangerously close to longing. My grandmother had been the only person who had made me feel seen in this family, the only one who had believed in me without conditions. To see her handwriting again was like being pulled back into her arms. But then I read the words, and the warmth collapsed into cold dread. My family, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it means I was right not to trust you. Gasps rose around the table. I felt my own lips part as though I couldn't breathe. The words were sharp, heavy, each one cutting deeper than the last. I built this home with love and sacrifice, the letter continued, and I watched as greed hollowed it out. I know the lies that have been told, the secrets buried under years of silence. You thought I didn't see, but I did. The room was silent, save for the trembling of the paper in my hands, ones my grandmother had written about, the same ones she had warned me not to trust. And yet, even in the venom of her accusations, there was love. Her words weren't just warnings, they were reminders. She told me I was the only one she trusted, that I was different, that I had a strength the rest of them didn't. Tears welled in my eyes, spilling hot onto my cheeks. It was as if she had reached across time to hold me again, to protect me one last time. But not everyone at the table shared my awe or my grief. "That's not her," my uncle spat, his face red with rage. "This is a forgery." My sister's laugh rang out sharp, brittle. "Do you really believe she would write something like that?" "Please, this is a trick," cousins murmured in agreement, shaking their heads, whispering words like fake and fraud. Their denial wasn't just loud, it was desperate. I wanted to scream at them, to shove the letter in their faces and demand how they could dismiss the very handwriting we all knew so well. But my throat was tight, my voice locked behind the tidal wave of emotion flooding me. That's when the pastor, seated quietly at the far end of the table, spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of authority that silenced the room. "I knew her penmanship better than most," he said softly. "She wrote our church announcements every week, by hand, until the day she died. That," he nodded toward the letter, "is hers." The denial faltered. My uncle's jaw clenched. My sister's fingers trembled against her glass. The room rippled with unease, no longer united in disbelief, but fractured in fear. I looked down at the paper again, reading the final paragraphs with my heart in my throat. "My estate is not what you think it is. What was signed before is not the truth. There is another truth, hidden, waiting. And to the one I trust most, know this, you will be tested. Not just by them, but by something far greater. The danger is not behind you. It is still ahead. The words blurred as my tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink. My grandmother's voice, her love, her warnings, they were all here, echoing louder than any whisper around the table. The polished wood, his glass toppling over and spilling red wine like a wound across the tablecloth. "This is a trick," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "She's trying to rewrite history. You're all blind if you believe a word of it." My sister leaned in, her smile sharp as glass, her voice low enough to cut, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't you see what she's doing? She's making herself the victim again. She always wanted more than her share, and now she's using Grandma's name to get it." Her words pierced deeper than any knife. She wasn't just dismissing the letter, she was dismissing me. Years of rivalry, of whispered slights and cruel jokes disguised as advice, crystallized in that moment. I felt the sting of betrayal more bitter than ever before, because it came from the one person who should have defended me, but had chosen to twist the knife instead. Cousins joined in, their voices overlapping in a chorus of disbelief and mockery. Forgery, manipulation, convenient timing. Each accusation was hurled like a stone, and though none of them had proof, their words carried the force of shared contempt. I sat there, the focus of every glare, my grandmother's words in one hand and my family's humiliation in the other. The pastor tried to speak, tried to remind them of the truth he had confirmed, but his voice was drowned out by the rising storm. Forks clattered against plates, chairs scraped against the floor, and in the chaos, the warmth of Thanksgiving was erased, replaced by a battlefield where I stood alone against an army of blood. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I swallowed them back, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Yet every word, every jeer, every twisting of my grandmother's truth carved at my resolve. It wasn't just denial, it was humiliation. They weren't content with dismissing me, they wanted to strip me bare, to make me doubt myself, to make everyone watching believe I was the liar, the manipulator, the fraud. My sister rose to her feet, towering over me as she leaned across the table. "Do you really expect us to believe Grandma trusted you, of all people? You, who couldn't even hold this family together for one dinner without turning..." Wanted to scream, to shout that I wasn't lying, that every word on the page was real, that my grandmother's voice was alive in the ink. But my throat burned, my voice caught in the storm of accusations. For the first time that night, I felt truly small, reduced to a spectacle for the amusement of those who had once called me family. And then, just when I thought the humiliation couldn't cut any deeper, I caught sight of the neighbors. They had been invited for Thanksgiving too, sitting at the far end of the table. Their eyes were wide, their whispers hushed, but their stares carried something worse than anger. It was pity. They weren't just watching a family dispute, they were watching me unravel, and their silent judgment was another blade added to the dozens already pierced. The sheriff, still standing at the doorway, had said nothing since delivering the envelope. His silence was deafening. His presence a reminder that this wasn't just about family anymore. It was official, legal, undeniable, and yet my relatives continued to drown the truth with noise. I closed my eyes for just a moment, trying to summon the sound of my grandmother's voice, the reassurance she had always given me, but all I could hear was the din of betrayal, the venomous chorus that painted me as an imposter in my own home. The dinner table, once a symbol of unity and gratitude, had become a battlefield, every fork and glass a weapon, every word a bullet. My grandmother's letter, once a beacon of truth, was being twisted into a noose, its weight pulling tighter around my neck with every accusation. I felt stripped, humiliated, cornered. And in that moment of despair, I wondered if this had been their plan all along, not just to deny the truth, but to destroy me in front of every witness, to make sure I would never rise again. Then, amid the chaos, it happened. A voice, low and deliberate, slipped through the noise. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't meant for the whole room. It was meant for me. Stop digging or you'll regret it. The words slithered into my ear like poison, sending a chill down my spine that no amount of candlelight could warm. I froze, the noise of the room fading into a distant roar as those 4 words echoed inside. Stop digging or else.
After that whisper at the Thanksgiving table, stop digging or you'll regret it, I knew I couldn't stay passive anymore. The letter had cracked open old wounds, but the whisper proved something darker. The battle wasn't just about family greed. It was about power, control, and silencing truth at all costs. For nights after, I hardly slept. I replayed every detail of the dinner, every glance, every smirk, every voice that had risen against me. My grandmother's words haunted me too. Instructions laced into her letter, references to people she trusted, especially a notary who had handled her affairs for decades. I remembered her writing, clear and deliberate. If all else fails, he will know the truth. Seek him. That line became my compass. The notary's office wasn't far, but the journey felt like trespassing enemy territory. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced someone was watching. The streets, usually familiar, looked darker, harsher, each shadow a threat. Even the simple sound of my own footsteps seemed too loud, like I was drawing attention to myself. The building was older than I expected, tucked between 2 glass storefronts as if time itself had forgotten it. Its red brick facade was faded, the windows clouded, and the wooden door sagged on its hinges. It didn't look like a place where secrets of such magnitude could be hidden, but then, maybe that was the point. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. Shelves sagged under the weight of thick ledgers, legal books, and cardboard boxes stacked in corners. The light from a single desk lamp flickered across the room, illuminating a man hunched over the desk. The notary looked older than I remembered. His shoulders drooped as if carrying decades of silence, and his thin white hair glowed faintly under the lamp. His hands shook as he adjusted his glasses, but his eyes, sharp, gray, tired, snapped up the moment I stepped inside. "You came," he said, his voice cracking under the strain of withheld truths. "I wasn't sure you would." I froze, the weight of his words making the air feel heavier. "You knew I'd come?" I asked, my throat dry. He nodded slowly, folding his trembling hands together on the desk. "Your grandmother told me someone would seek me out. She said it would only happen if things had gone wrong, terribly wrong." Hearing a confession decades in the making. He leaned back in his chair, his body trembling as if even speaking those words was dangerous. "Years ago, after your grandmother passed, I was approached. Threats were made, promises too. I was forced to remain silent, to hide what I had witnessed, to destroy what I could not bear to destroy. I preserved what I could." My pulse spiked. "What do you mean?" He reached under the desk, his hands fumbling through a drawer until he pulled out a small envelope, its paper yellowed, its edges frayed. With great care, he laid it before me. I couldn't save everything, but I saved this. I opened it with trembling hands, expecting another letter, another accusation. But inside was something small, metallic, and embossed with a familiar design. My grandmother's seal. A duplicate. The breath caught in my throat. This was the kind of thing that couldn't be faked. It was real, solid, undeniable. A piece of evidence my family hadn't been able to erase. Tears pricked at my eyes as I held it. For weeks I had been humiliated, mocked, cornered, made to doubt myself. But this tiny object was proof. Proof that my grandmother had told the truth. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that the inheritance, the letter, the whispers, they were all part of a larger scheme to silence me. But my relief didn't last long. The notary leaned forward, his face pale, his voice barely above a whisper. "You must understand, the people who coerced me, the ones who orchestrated all this, they are not who you think." Fear slithered through me. "You mean Claire? My uncle? My cousins?" He shook his head, his expression heavy with regret. "They are pawns. Yes, greedy, yes, complicit, but not the masterminds. They were manipulated, guided like pieces on a chessboard.
The true power, the real mastermind, has not yet shown themselves. His words landed like a blow to my chest. All this time I had believed my sister, my family, were the enemies. And while they had betrayed me, twisted the truth, and humiliated me, the real enemy was someone else. Someone still in the shadows. I tried to speak, but my mouth went dry. All I could whisper was, "Then who is it?" The notary's hands shook harder now, his face etched with fear. He looked.
Tread carefully. Every move you make, every question you ask, will be noticed. They've been watching all along. The room felt colder, the air sharper. The shadows stretched longer against the walls, and I suddenly felt as though eyes were on me from every corner. I clutched the seal tightly, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. This was validation, yes, but it was also a warning. If my family weren't the true enemies, then who was? How deep did this deception run? The notary's eyes met mine, his face pale but his voice steady, carrying the gravity of truth and the terror of consequence. And with trembling hands, he whispered, "The real mastermind hasn't even shown their face yet." What I thought was family greed turned out to be something far darker, organized corruption hiding in plain sight. When I left the notary's office, the weight of the duplicate seal in my pocket felt heavier than stone. It wasn't just a relic of my grandmother's truth, it was a burden, proof that my family's betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. His final words echoed in my head with every step I took home. The real mastermind hasn't even shown their face yet. That night, sleep was impossible. I paced my apartment, the walls closing in, my mind racing with every detail of the dinner, the letter, the accusations, and the notary's trembling confession. The whispers weren't just about inheritance anymore. They were about something bigger, something I hadn't wanted to see but could no longer ignore. So I did what I always did when chaos threatened to swallow me whole. I organized. I cleared the wall of my living room, pulling down picture frames, moving furniture until the plaster was bare. Then I began to build. Printouts, photographs, copies of documents I'd salvaged from my grandmother's things, articles about real estate transfers, even bank statements I had once thought meaningless. I pinned them up, one by one. With red string, tape, and scribbled notes, I began to connect the dots. Hours turned into days, coffee cups piled on my counter, takeout boxes littered the floor.
Contracts that made no sense. The house wasn't just an inheritance. It was a laundering hub, a vessel to clean money that had no business being in our family. My hands trembled as I pinned each discovery on the wall. This wasn't about siblings fighting over scraps. It wasn't even about my grandmother's favoritism or my sister's resentment. It was about corruption. Organized, systemic, dangerous. And my family wasn't the root of it. They were the cover. The realization shattered me. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, tears burning my eyes. For so long, I had carried the pain of betrayal like a personal wound, believing my family's hatred was about me, about who I was, what I had or hadn't done. But now, staring at the web of lies pinned to my wall, I understood. I wasn't the target. I was the obstacle. They had humiliated me not just because they hated me, but because silencing me served a larger purpose. Every laugh at the dinner table, every denial, every cruel word, it was all part of a larger scheme to make sure I doubted myself, to ensure I would never dig deeper. I buried my face in my hands, sobs shaking my body. It was too much, too big. I was just one person. How could I possibly fight something this entrenched, this dangerous? But then I looked up, my eyes landing on the seal resting on the desk, its design gleaming under the lamplight. My grandmother's crest, her last protection, her silent reminder that truth was still worth fighting for. She had trusted me, out of everyone, to carry this burden. Wiping my tears, I pulled myself up from the floor. The grief was still heavy, the fear still raw, but beneath it all burned something stronger, determination. I turned back to the wall,
adding more notes, drawing more lines. Every betrayal, every forged document, every hidden account, I mapped it all, building a case even if I didn't yet know how I would use it. My apartment no longer looked like a home. It looked like a war room. Hours blurred together. The sun rose and set behind drawn curtains, my world reduced to papers, string, and secrets. The picture became clearer with every piece, and with clarity came terror. This wasn't just about my family. This was about networks far beyond us. Laundered
Of my apartment door. My heart stuttered, my breath catching in my throat. Midnight. No one should be here. I froze, my pen still in hand, my eyes darting to the seal on the desk, the wall of evidence, the shadow stretching across the room. Another knock followed. Slower this time, more insistent. My legs felt heavy as I forced myself to the door. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. No figure, no movement, just the dim glow of the hallway light. My hand shook as I turned the knob. I opened the door just a crack, the chain still locked in place. No one was there. But on the floor, just inside the doorway, lay an envelope. My stomach dropped as I bent to pick it up. It was plain, unmarked, the paper crisp and new. I tore it open with trembling fingers, my breath caught in my lungs. Inside, a single piece of paper. 6 words, written in neat block letters. Stop digging, or else you'll regret it. The paper slipped from my fingers, floating to the floor. My chest tightened, my pulse racing. Someone knew. Someone was watching, and they were close enough to leave a message at my door. And just as the pieces connected, a knock on the door delivered a note. Stop digging, or else. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the person you thought would never hurt you. The note at my door still lay on the floor when morning came, its words etched into my mind as though branded into my skin. Stop digging, or else you'll regret it. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. My wall of evidence stared back at me all night. Every photograph, every string of red yarn a reminder of just how deep I had already dug. And now, someone out there knew I was getting close. By sunrise, the fear was unbearable. I needed someone, anyone I could trust. Someone who could remind me I wasn't losing my mind. Someone who could reassure me that I wasn't alone in this fight. That's when I thought of Emily, my cousin. Emily had always been different from the others. Where Claire and the rest of them carried sharp edges, Emily had been soft, steady, the kind of person who listened without judgment. She wasn't notary, the duplicate seal, the wall of evidence now covering my apartment. I even showed her the threat note, my hands shaking as I passed it across the table. Emily listened quietly, her brow furrowed, her hand resting over mine as though to steady me. "You're not crazy," she said softly. "You're brave. And you're right to keep digging. If Grandma trusted you with this, then you can't stop now." Tears welled in my eyes. Relief flooded through me like warmth after a long winter. Finally, someone who believed me. Finally, someone who didn't twist my words or laugh at my pain. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't completely alone. I left her apartment that evening lighter, the weight on my chest eased by her reassurance. I told myself I had found an ally, that with Emily by my side, maybe I had a chance. But hope has a cruel way of setting you up for a harder fall. 2 nights later, I returned to my grandmother's mansion, hoping to find more documents hidden in the study. As I crept through the dimly lit halls, I heard voices, familiar ones. I froze, pressing myself against the wall, my breath caught in my throat. One voice was Claire's, sharp, mocking, full of disdain. The other voice made my blood run cold. Emily. "She showed me everything," Emily whispered. "The seal, the notes, all of it. She's been building a whole wall in her apartment. She thinks she's on to something big." Claire's laugh was cruel, echoing through the empty house. "Of course she does. She's always been dramatic, always desperate to play the victim. But now, thanks to you, I know exactly what she's found. We'll deal with it before she can make a move." The words hit me like a physical blow. My knees weakened, my vision blurred. I gripped the wall to steady myself as the betrayal sank in. Emily, my cousin, my confidant, my supposed ally, hadn't just doubted me. She had delivered me into Claire's hands. I felt sick. My chest constricted as tears stung my eyes, but I couldn't make a sound. I pressed my hand against my mouth, desperate not to give myself away. Claire's voice dropped lower.
I barely felt it. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and devastation. Back in my apartment, I collapsed against the door, my body shaking with sobs. I had been foolish to trust her, foolish to think anyone in this family could be on my side. The betrayal cut deeper than all the accusations at Thanksgiving combined, because this wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated, deliberate, and personal. I tried to steady my breathing, but just as I began to calm, the sound of paper sliding across the floor jolted me. Another envelope. It had been pushed under my door, silent and unseen. My heart lurched as I crawled forward, my hands trembling as I picked it up. I tore it open, the paper crisp and unfamiliar. Inside was a single note, stark and merciless in its simplicity. 6 words. Stop digging or you'll regret it. The same words as before, but this time they didn't feel like a warning. They felt like a promise. 6 words stared back at me. Stop digging or you'll regret it. At night, the mansion didn't just creak. It whispered secrets it was desperate to keep hidden. The night I returned to my grandmother's mansion, the world outside felt as though it had conspired against me. The moon hid behind swollen clouds, letting only slivers of cold silver cut across the lawn. The wind dragged through the bare trees, tugging at my coat, whispering warnings I refused. I parked far down the drive, heart thrumming in my throat, headlights off so no one could see I had come. After Emily's betrayal and the anonymous threats shoved under my door, I could no longer take anything for granted. Trust was a luxury I had squandered. Now every shadow might conceal a pair of watching eyes. The gravel crunched too loudly beneath my shoes as I approached, so I slipped off onto the grass, the damp blades soaking my... The mansion loomed ahead, its familiar windows dark hollows in the... It was my grandmother's house, the place of every holiday, every memory of warmth. But under the night sky, it felt changed, predatory. Childhood comfort had curdled into menace. The servant's entrance still remembered me. The key, hidden years ago behind a loose brick, was gone, but I found a replacement tucked under the rusted stair rail. Someone had been here after her death. Someone who knew shadows. I brushed my fingertips across it. A silent apology for disturbing its stillness. I knew where I needed to go. The study had always been her sanctuary. That was where she kept her ledgers, her correspondence, her secrets, carefully tucked away in leather-bound journals. I moved slowly, navigating the dark by memory, my small flashlight cupped in my hand so its glow was muted. The hallways creaked in protest beneath me. The family portraits lining the walls watched me with blank stares. Once, I had seen love in those painted eyes. Tonight they felt like accusations. The study door stuck at the bottom corner as it always had. I nudged it open with my hip, the old oak groaning in recognition. A wave of scent washed over me. Aged paper, leather, orange oil polish. For a moment, I felt her presence so vividly it stopped me cold, as though she had only just stepped away from her desk and might return at any second, scolding me gently for snooping. Her desk was an altar to memory. Stacks of envelopes, neat piles of notebooks, drawers brimming with folded documents. My flashlight trembled across the shelves, revealing rows of binders, boxes marked with dates, albums that sagged with photographs. The house had not been emptied. Whoever had taken the envelope I would later find had left the rest, either careless or confident I would never make it this far. The first journal I opened nearly broke me. Its cracked green leather cover was softened from decades of handling, and the script inside was unmistakably hers, precise, steady, as though her hand refused to tremble even when her words carried weight enough to shatter stone. I skimmed the early pages, her notes on gardening, church events, recipes tucked between to-do lists. Then the shift came. Paragraphs about meetings with lawyers,
suspicions about signatures, casual dinners where the wrong questions had been asked too carefully. She recorded everything. My uncle bringing a banker to Sunday supper, her unease at how the man's eyes lingered on documents instead of food, a contractor billing for renovations she never approved, a cousin suddenly wealthy with no source of income she could trace. The more I read, the heavier the words became. What I had once believed to be family bickering over inheritance revealed itself as something orchestrated, systemic. She doubt whether blood had ever meant anything at all. My grandmother had carried this weight alone, documenting betrayal after betrayal, never breaking, never faltering, and now that burden had been passed to me. Hours slipped by as I pored over journal after journal. My hands shook as I added letters to my pile, receipts, contracts, pieces of evidence that would make sense only when fitted together. My grandmother's handwriting became my lifeline, her voice guiding me even from the grave. Then I found it. Behind the family Bible on the highest shelf, tucked where the moonlight fell strongest through the window, lay a thick envelope. My breath caught. Across the front, in bold, unmistakable letters, she had written, "Second Will." Underneath, 2 heavy underlines. She wanted this found. She wanted me to see it. My hands trembled as I carried it to the desk. I had dreamed of this moment, prayed for it, that one piece of undeniable proof that would silence Claire, Dalton, all of them. The envelope was heavy in my grip, its flap sealed tight. I slid my finger under the adhesive, slow, reverent. Inside was nothing. Not a page, not a signature, not a whisper of her intentions. Just emptiness, deliberate and cruel. The world tilted. My knees buckled and I collapsed into the chair, the envelope limp in my hand. My throat closed around a sob that tore free before I could stop it. They had beaten me here. Whoever had been watching, listening, always one step ahead, they had known. They had taken the will and left only the shell behind, a hollow mockery of hope. I pressed the empty envelope to my chest, rocking slightly as tears streamed hot down my cheeks. This was worse than denial, worse than betrayal. It was theft, precise and intentional. They had stolen not just a document, but my last tether to justice. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Grief hollowed me out, left me trembling and weak. Still, I gathered what I could. One journal hidden under my sweater, letters tucked into my boot, photographs concealed beneath the lining of my phone case. Emptiness might have been left for me, but I would not leave empty-handed. I extinguished my flashlight and let the moonlight guide me back through the hall. Dignity. The courthouse was colder than it should have been, its marble floors echoing with footsteps that reminded me more of a funeral procession than a pursuit of justice. I clutched the folder of papers I had gathered. Fragments from my grandmother's journals, photocopies of receipts, photographs that whispered truths if you looked closely enough. My palms sweated against the manila surface, as though even my body doubted these fragile pieces would hold against the storm Claire had unleashed. She was already seated when I entered, a portrait of composure in a tailored suit that looked more like armor than clothing. Her chin lifted slightly when she saw me, her mouth curved in that smug, cruel line I had come to know too well. Beside her sat Dalton, her lawyer, slick as oil and twice as hard to wash off. His hair was perfect, his smile sharp, his eyes gleaming with the confidence of a man who had destroyed people like me before. When the judge entered and the gavel struck wood, I felt the sound in my chest. The room hushed and the battle began. Claire wasn't suing just for the mansion. She was suing for my credibility, my sanity, my place in the family. If she won, she wouldn't just take the house. She would erase me from the story entirely. Dalton rose first, his movements smooth, deliberate. He spoke with the cadence of a preacher but the venom of a snake, painting me as unstable, paranoid, a woman spinning wild conspiracies to justify why her grandmother hadn't trusted her. He described my investigation wall like it was the work of obsession, not persistence. He mocked my evidence as scraps of paper twisted into fantasy. Each word chipped away at the image I wanted the court to see. When it was my turn, I stood on trembling legs. I spoke about the letter, about the duplicate seal, about the journals that revealed decades of betrayal.
I spoke about the whispers at Thanksgiving. The threat notes slipped under my door. My voice wavered, but I forced it steady. I had to believe that truth, spoken aloud, carried its own weight. Dalton struck like a hammer. "Isn't it true," he asked, holding up one of my grandmother's journals, "that this is nothing more than her personal reflections? Scribbles, thoughts, impressions, not legally binding evidence?" I tried to answer, but he cut me off, circling like a wolf. "And isn't it also true," he pressed.
Felt the jury's eyes on me, weighing not my words but my worth. I wanted to scream, to tell them how carefully the lies had been woven, how deeply the corruption ran, how my family had been pawns in something larger. But every attempt was drowned in Dalton's polished voice, his smirk as he objected, his sideways glances at Claire that said, "We're winning." By midday, humiliation seeped into my bones. I felt stripped bare, reduced to a woman on display, my pain dissected and ridiculed. Every word I spoke seemed to fall into a void, swallowed by Dalton's practiced distortions. Claire sat smug, unflinching, as though she already saw the mansion's keys dangling in her hand. The judge called a recess. I stumbled into the hallway, my chest heaving, my hands trembling. The chatter of spectators buzzed like flies around me. I sank onto a bench near the vending machines, my folder clutched like a shield too thin to matter. My fiancé leaned close, whispering encouragement, but even his words couldn't drown the roar of my shame. That's when I noticed him, a janitor pushing a mop cart down the hall, his uniform faded, his movements quiet. No one paid him attention. Why would they? But as he passed me, his eyes flicked toward mine, sharp for just an instant. He paused to adjust the trash bag in his cart, and in that brief moment, his hand slipped something onto the bench beside me. An envelope. My heart stuttered. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. By the time I looked back, the janitor was already walking away, blending back into invisibility. I picked up the envelope with shaking hands. Its paper was yellowed at the edges, the seal brittle with age. It felt as though it had waited decades for this moment. My throat tightened. I slid it open carefully, praying for something, anything, that could save me. Inside wasn't a letter or a will, but a cassette tape. Old, black, unremarkable. Except for the label. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Strong, deliberate strokes. My grandmother's hand. My breath caught, my vision tunneling around that single word written in her script. She had left me her voice. Not just paper that could be dismissed as paranoia, not just signatures they could call forgeries, but her voice.
It was both salvation and a curse. If I played it, everything could change. But if I played it without proof, Dalton would twist it into another humiliation. Claire would sneer, and the jury would dismiss it as fabrication. I had already been shredded once in that courtroom. I couldn't risk another defeat. The answer came to me in the quiet hours of dawn, when the city was still and the world felt momentarily safe. The notary, the frail man with trembling hands who had once warned me that my enemies weren't just my family. He had given me the duplicate seal, proof my grandmother's will had been tampered with. He had lived with secrets for decades, hiding truths under the weight of threats. If anyone could confirm what I had, it was him. I returned to his office 2 days later. The building sagged between two glass storefronts like a forgotten relic, its bricks cracked, its windows clouded with age. The sign above the door was faded, the gold lettering barely legible. It looked like the kind of place people walked past without ever noticing. Perhaps that was why it had survived this long, because it was invisible. When he opened the door, I saw a man further diminished since our last meeting. His back curved, his skin papery, his hands trembling even when still. Yet his eyes, gray and sharp, were alive with something deeper than age. It was the haunted look of a man who had carried guilt for too long. "You came back," he said softly, almost a whisper, as if he had half hoped I wouldn't. "I had to," my voice cracked, raw with exhaustion. I pulled the cassette from my bag and laid it on the desk between us. "She left me this, but I can't use it unless someone like you, someone official, tells the truth. I need you." For a long moment, he only stared at it. His eyes traced the label, his lips trembling as he mouthed the letters in my grandmother's handwriting.
When his hand reached for it, I noticed how violently it shook, not the gentle tremor of age, but the quake of memory, of fear breaking through the dam he had built around his silence. "I thought I destroyed it all," he whispered, his voice so thin I had to lean closer to hear. The wills, the recordings, every trace of her voice. I told myself I had no choice, that it was survival, but here it is, after all these. I had imagined betrayal as cruelty, as deliberate malice, but here sat a man whose betrayal had been born of fear, of desperation, and that made it hurt worse, because fear was contagious. I knew it. I had felt it every time I looked over my shoulder, every time a note slid under my door, every time footsteps echoed behind me in the mansion. Fear could break anyone. He slid open a drawer and pulled out the duplicate seal again, pressing it into my palm with shaking fingers. "This proves her will was tampered with. You don't know what it cost me to keep this, but I couldn't burn it. I couldn't burn everything. Some part of me prayed someone, maybe you, would come looking." I closed my fingers around it, the cool metal grounding me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to validation. My grandmother's voice might be dismissed as paranoia, but this seal, was undeniable. "Claire's using Dalton to destroy me," I said, my voice tight. "She thinks she's the mastermind." "But you told me before, she's just a pawn. Tell me who's behind this. Tell me who wanted my grandmother silenced." His eyes darted toward the window, though the blinds were drawn. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that barely stirred the air. "I never saw the face. I never heard the name. Orders came through intermediaries, lawyers, bankers, contractors, people who smiled in daylight and threatened in shadow. Claire, your uncle, your cousins, they were baited, bribed, used. They thought they were playing their own game, but they were being played." I shook my head, disbelieving. "So you don't know who it is? You can't give me a name?" His hands gripped the desk, knuckles white, as though holding back words that would burn him if spoken. "I know only this. Your grandmother suspected them. She left trails because she knew they'd come for her voice, her will, her house. She outmaneuvered them for as long as she could, but in the end, they silenced her. And now they're trying to silence you." The room seemed to contract around me. My lungs struggled for air. For months I had thought my family were the enemies, that Claire was the architect of my humiliation, my uncle the one pulling strings. But no, they were just masks, pawns. The real enemy hadn't even revealed themselves. A shiver ran down my spine. I remembered the whispers at Thanksgiving, the notes shoved through me. She fought still. The notary's hand covered mine, his touch cold, frail, but urgent. His voice dropped to the faintest whisper, each word trembling. "You think you've seen betrayal. You think you've seen the worst, but you haven't. The one pulling the strings hasn't even shown their face yet." The air between us turned heavy, the silence ringing louder than any sound. My pulse pounded in my ears. If the mastermind hadn't revealed themselves, it meant the game was only beginning. The one pulling the strings hasn't even shown their face yet. When the gavel fell, it wasn't just a ruling. It was justice delivered from her grave. The retired notary's words echoed in my head like a curse. The one pulling the strings hasn't even shown their face yet. Those words haunted me for nights, filling every corner of my dreams with shadows I couldn't chase away. But when I walked back into that courtroom, I knew I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her, for my grandmother, for her voice, her foresight, her courage. The trial stretched for weeks, every day chipping away at my strength. Claire sat across from me, rigid and pale, but still wearing the mask of superiority she had worn since childhood. Dalton, her lawyer, carried himself with arrogance, confident that technicalities, manipulation, and his reputation would crush me the way they had crushed so many others. But this time, I had more than suspicion, more than whispers. I had the seal, I had the tapes, and I had the notary's confession. The judge listened carefully as my attorney laid out the chain of evidence. Each piece was presented slowly, deliberately, like bricks stacking on top of each other to form a wall too strong to be torn down by Dalton's barbs. The duplicate seal gleamed under the lights of the courtroom, a silent witness to decades of fraud. The notary's sworn testimony, though frail in voice, cut through the silence like steel. And finally, the cassette. My grandmother's voice spilling into the courtroom, steady and deliberate, naming names, describing accounts, dictating her will with clarity that no forgery could mimic. I will never forget the silence in that room when her voice filled it. It was as if time itself had stopped, as if the air had thickened with the weight of her authority. Every juror question are to be restored to their rightful heir. Furthermore, perjury, fraud, and obstruction charges will be pursued against the defendants. The gavel struck. Once. Twice. The sound reverberated through the room like thunder. Relief did not come all at once. It wasn't a rush of triumph, not the kind of cinematic moment I had imagined as a child when justice always arrived in a neat, satisfying bow. No, it came slowly, like the thaw of ice after a long winter. My lungs loosened. My chest lifted, and the tears I had been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. It was not victory, it was vindication. Claire sat frozen, her face pale as paper, her hands trembling. For the first time, she looked small. Dalton leaned toward her, whispering furiously, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew the fight was over. The charges against Claire were immediate: fraud, conspiracy, complicity. She tried to protest, her voice cracking, but every word only made her sound more desperate. Dalton's name was added to the investigation, and though he didn't face immediate sentencing, the storm gathering around him was undeniable. He had built his empire on intimidation and lies, and now that empire was beginning to crack. When I walked out of that courthouse, flashes of cameras greeted me. Neighbors, journalists, even strangers had gathered, their faces lit with curiosity, awe, and something else, something closer to respect. For so long I had been the subject of whispers, of doubt, of humiliation, but now people looked at me differently, not as a victim, but as someone who had dragged truth into the light. The mansion was mine again. I drove up to it in silence, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, the sky above painted in streaks of orange and gold as the sun set. For years it had loomed over me like a fortress of betrayal, every window watching, every hallway whispering secrets. But when I unlocked the front door this time, the air felt different, lighter. The first place I went was her study. The room smelled faintly of old books and lavender, as if time had folded around it and preserved her presence. The desk was exactly as she had left it. Her words blurred through my tears. She spoke not of wealth, not of property, but of responsibility. She wrote of using the estate not as a fortress, but as a foundation, for children without homes, for women without safety, for neighbors who had only ever seen its gates closed. Wealth fades, she wrote, but legacy endures. Build something greater than yourself and you will outlive even the lies told about you. I sank into her chair, the letter trembling in my hands, my chest heaving with sobs. For months I had fought for this house as if it were the last piece of her I had left. But she was reminding me that she had never wanted me to fight for stone walls and acres of land. She wanted me to fight for truth, for justice, for people. That night I made my decision. The mansion would no longer be a symbol of corruption and betrayal. It would no longer stand as a relic of greed. It would become a foundation, a place of refuge, a school, a shelter, a library where her words and wisdom could live on. The transformation was slow but unstoppable. Rooms once filled with whispers became classrooms echoing with laughter. The dining hall where accusations had flown across the table became a community space where neighbors shared meals. The library grew into a resource center, filled not only with my grandmother's journals, but with books donated from across the city. Volunteers came. Neighbors who had once whispered about scandal now carried paintbrushes, hammers, and bookshelves. They didn't just restore the house, they breathed life into it. And every time I walked through those halls, I didn't see betrayal anymore. I saw renewal. Claire faced sentencing. Dalton vanished, a fugitive somewhere in the wind, but his shadow no longer frightened me. Because I understood now, power survives in silence, but it crumbles in light. On the anniversary of my grandmother's passing, we held the first official gathering in the mansion's great hall. The chandeliers glowed warmly, not with wealth, but with welcome. Families gathered, children laughed, and the air was filled not with whispers, but with music. I stood at the front, her letter in my hand, and read her words aloud. "Truth can be buried," I said, my voice steady, "but it can never be killed." The applause was thunderous. But more than that, it was healing. It shows me you want more of these shocking family dramas. Drop a comment sharing which twist left you speechless. And don't forget to subscribe with the bell on so that you never miss the next jaw-dropping reveal. Share this video with a friend who loves suspense as much as you do, and re-watch the playlist link below to catch hidden clues you might have missed. Tell me in the comments what kind of story you'd like to see next. Wedding scandal, business betrayal, or a small-town conspiracy. And if you've lived through something like this yourself, just write, "I've got a story," so we can bring it to life together. And before you go, answer this. When truth threatens comfort, which one would you choose?